Today's headline is Wild Forest Episodes, a Pennsylvania hunter's tales of deer, bears, and wolves. The subheadline says, Savage fight of a wounded bear, pinned between a black's horns, bucks in a death grapple, the white deer. This story originally came from Scranton on September 15th. It says, Mr. Marcus N.B. Killam, the venerable father of Mr. Benjamin F. Killam of this city, has slain more bears, deer, and other wild animals than any other hunter now living in eastern Pennsylvania. He is hale and hearty at the age of 80. He is a trifle above the average height, broad-shouldered and muscular. He has a long white beard and mustache, and his forehead is high and full. In his prime, he weighed 200 pounds, and he had the reputation of being the strongest person physically and the quickest and sharpest shot with the rifle of any man in the region where sturdy men and crack shooters were in the majority. Mr. Killam has always lived near where he was born 80 years ago. I'm afraid, said the old hunter, that you have come to the wrong place to get information for publication. I'm glad to meet you, but I don't believe that any of my experiences will be worth printing. I haven't kept an exact account of the bears I've killed, but I know that I've slain quite a number more than 100. In 3 different years, when beech nuts were plentiful, I killed 9 bears each season. When dams were built in the streams and the water backed up in the swamps, the bears had to move to the uplands where many of them were killed that wouldn't have been if the swamps had remained in the natural state. I haven't had any hand-to-hand conflicts with bears, and I don't believe one hunter in 100 ever had, though some of them are reported to have told ridiculous and often amusing tales of getting into close quarters with bears and bucks. I have made it a practice always not to approach a wounded buck or bear without having at least one barrel loaded. In the days when single-barrel rifles were the only guns we had, I always reloaded before I went near to a bear or buck that I had shot. I once wounded a bear with a bullet, and while I was waiting to see whether it would be necessary to give her the contents of my buckshot barrel to make her lie still, a man who accompanied me let his dog loose on her. He neglected to remove the strap in his eagerness to see the dog worry the animal. The bear was bleeding freely, and the sight of the dog made her very angry. She sprang at him, planted one of her feet on the strap, and kept him from running away. In order to save the dog's life, I rushed forward and struck at her nose, my intention being to make her dodge and take her foot off the strap. Instead of doing so, she seized both barrels with her teeth, so that the muzzle stuck out one side of her mouth. That called for quick action. I twisted the stock a little, pulled the buckshot trigger, and blew the veins of her neck open. She took her foot off the strap then, the frightened dog ran away, and the bear soon bled to death. An acquaintance once made a mistake walking up to a buck he had wounded before he had reloaded his rifle. The buck made a lunge at him so suddenly that he hadn't time to jump to one side, and his body became wedged in between the angry animal's antlers. He was perfectly helpless, and the buck was shaking him at a frightful rate when another hunter broke the buck's neck with a rifle ball. He would have been killed if the man had not been near, and he was severely wounded about the waist and abdomen. Another acquaintance shot a buck at long range one fall. The animal had its head down when the hunter discovered it, and he supposed that it was grazing until he approached the spot where it had fallen, when he found that its horns were locked into the antlers of another buck that had been dead for some time. The bucks had fought with their horns, locked until one of them had succumbed, and the other one would have had a horrible death if the hunter hadn't shot him. The buck's meat was worthless. The hunter kept the locked antlers for many years. I know of another hunter who obtained a fine pair of locked antlers without wasting any ammunition. He was still hunting deer back in the woods toward Blooming Grove Park when he came to a spot where the leaves and undergrowth had been torn up by the hooves of bucks in a battle. He saw that the fight had been remarkably fierce and prolonged, but he was not prepared for the surprise that he got a little later. While searching around to ascertain which direction the battling bucks had taken, he came to a large log where the mold had been dug deep with their hooves. The tracks ended there, and on looking over the log, the hunter saw 2 fighting bucks lying dead between the log and a big tree. They lay on their backs, side by side. Their feet were sticking up and their antlers were locked together. All the indications went to show that the bucks, in their struggle for the mastery, had tumbled over the log, landed on their backs, got wedged between the log and tree, and met a lingering death. The ugly combatants had been dead 2 or 3 days, apparently, the hunter said, and he secured the locked antlers and let the bodies as he had found them. One fall, I came across a spot in the woods where 2 bucks had fought furiously only a short time before. The leaves were covered with blood, and the earth had been dug up with their hooves some distance around. The bucks were evenly matched, and they were lucky enough to not get their antlers locked. I judged that the battle was a drawn one, for I could see where they had separated, and I tracked the 2 in opposite directions a good ways. What becomes of the antlers bucks shed? Oh, we often find them in the woods, and it's a well-established fact that mice devour them. There's no mystery about where they go to. I can't say from experience that deer stamp rattlesnakes to death, but I've heard that such is the fact. Wolves, panthers, and beavers have been exterminated in this part of the state in my day. The last panther I ever heard of being in Pike County, my father caught in a trap. It was a she panther, and I shot her in the trap. She measured 7 feet from the point of her nose to the end of her tail. One winter father caught 4 wolves and a bear in the same trap in one locality. My memory is very poor now, continued Mr. Killam, but I remember the winter of 1836 very well because 4 feet of snow fell in the woods in one storm. That was a dreadfully hard winter for deer. Wolves were numerous then and they slaughtered the deer terribly. During 2 or 3 seasons previous to that winter, a very white buck had occasionally been seen in the woods by various hunters. He was an oddity, and I guess no one cared to kill him. After the big storm, I tracked the white buck and a doe some distance in the snow, giving them up when wallowing became too tiresome. In a few days, a crust formed on the snow, and I then followed the tracks until I came to where the doe and white buck had been slain by wolves. The wolves had eaten nothing but the kidneys, liver, and heart, and the carcasses lay as though they had just been killed. The markings of the white buck were noticeable on his progeny for several years afterward. When the snow went off in the spring, we found in many places the skeletons of deer that had been slain by wolves. It paid to kill wolves in those days because we got a bounty of $12 on each one. The biggest doe I ever shot was as heavy as the largest of bucks. She had never given birth to a fawn, and on that account she had grown to an enormous size, balancing the steel yards at 230 pounds. I don't believe her equal was ever shot in this region. Of course, animals think and plan before they act, especially in the matter of procuring food. I've never seen that fact more clearly illustrated than in the action of a pack of 4 wolves that started out one moonlit night when I was a young man to get some mutton. The wolves appeared on top of a knoll a few rods above where a flock of sheep were lying near a barn. They all stopped, and in a moment one of them ran down the hill and scared the sheep up. It didn't attempt to catch one, and instead of chasing the sheep after it had started them on a run up the knoll, it kept on down the creek as if it was having a play spell all by itself. But the wolf was carrying out its part of the program to the letter. It had evidently been detailed to scare up the sheep, for the moment the flock cantered up the hill, the rest of the pack pounced on one of the sheep and killed it. The flock scattered, and the wolf that had acted as driver joined his companions, and the 4 tore at the sheep till a couple of rifle balls killed 2 of them, when the others stopped feeding and ran off. One spring, a bear with cubs got into one of my traps. The cubs deserted their mother, and when I got in sight of her, she had the drag nicely balanced between her teeth and was making off on 3 legs. That was about the smartest thing I ever saw a bear do. I killed her, but I didn't get the cubs. I once noticed a large flock of crows and a great commotion around a dead tree. I couldn't account for the way they were acting and the noise they made, so I went near to the tree to investigate. I couldn't make out then what they were squalling and pitching at. The crows paid no attention to me, not even after I had shot one of them with a bullet. I thought that was a little strange, but I was still more puzzled when after I had brought 3 more of them to the ground with the rifle, the remainder of the flock continued to sail and squall around the tree as though they were bound to stay till I'd shot them all. I noticed that all the crows darted pretty close to one spot as they circled around the tree, and finally I saw a wing move at the point the crows were pitching at. Then I discovered an owl sitting close to the trunk. It was the owl's wing that had moved, and no sooner had I knocked the big-eyed bird out of the tree with a bullet than the crows flew out of sight. Why they objected to the owl's perching itself on the stub of a limb, I could never study out. The owl's plumage was unlike any I ever saw, and much handsomer. There were at least half a dozen colors in it, and perhaps that was why the crows were endeavoring to destroy it. This story came from the great state of New York, being reported in the Sun of September 16, 1894. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, now remember before you leave, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.